So psychology researchers, but also people working on interventions within the community or also in other settings may want to apply for money or funding through grants. So in this video, I'll cover kind of some of the very basics of grant writing. The details will really depend on what type of grant you are writing and what agency you're submitting to. But normally the grant writing process starts with an idea. You have a new intervention you want to try, you want to get funding for an after-school program, or you have a great research project that's going to be time and money consuming. So granting agencies are going to want to see that you have a clear idea of what you want to do, and so you have to actually develop the project first. You need to think about the research questions, participants, method, cost. They're going to need to have a budget. And so basically when you're writing a grant, you're writing many of the same elements that would go into a research paper, but you haven't done the research yet. So developing the project is that first step. Then you'll need to, of course, identify funding sources. Who might give you money? There are big government agencies like the National Science Foundation or the National Institutes of Health, which fund many large research projects, but there are also private organizations as well as local agencies, and sometimes even your college or university can have grants that you might be eligible for. So in order to figure out where you might get funding, you have to have that idea of what you want to do. So once you find a funding agency that you think will fit with your idea, you need to do your research and kind of figure out what the funder's requirements are in terms of what you need to have prepped and what you need to submit. And also, and what you need to submit. And it's essential that you turn in that required material because they're going to be looking at that. And the last step is really the only step that requires detailed writing, which is actually getting that grant proposal written. So again, it'll vary by agency, but I've got a few general tips. So again, we start with the planning. Often we'll start with a pilot study or a feasibility study. And so you'll do a small version of what you're planning to do in order to test the methods, to fix any issues, and you're doing this in kind of a low stakes environment. Doing a pilot study can also get you logistical and financial efforts or estimates and prove to the funding agency that your project is viable. So as you're planning, the things that you want to think about addressing are, what are your goals? What do you seek to achieve through your research? What are the unique contributions? They're not going to give you a bunch of money just to replicate somebody else's study. You need to really figure out how you are contributing something unique. You need to know what those project steps are and who will be involved in your project. And so those can be where those pilot studies can really help address things. Again, you need to determine the funder's requirements. So it's really important that you know what the requirements are and how to meet them. And you need to make sure to follow the agency's directions. So you need to think about, can you meet all of the application deadlines? Are you going to be ready to submit by the deadline? What specific information do they require? And in what format? So if it says write a 3-page summary for your method and you turn in 4 pages, you could get automatically disqualified. I've heard stories of people getting rejected from grants because their margins were wrong. So you need to really make sure you follow those instructions to a T. You also need to make sure and think about what are the most important things to include about yourself and your project. So you want to think about what qualities are going to be important for your project and for your granting agencies. And also that might determine what programs you're eligible for. So for example, a lot of the national research funding agencies have special programs for graduate students or young faculty so that you're not competing against the really well-established researchers. So you want to make sure you know about these and take advantage of them. So again, remember that each granting agency has different requirements. So these are just some that you might come across, but you always need to follow the specifications for your grant. So you may have an abstract or cover letter. This is probably what gets read the most. Normally this is longer than like a journal abstract. And what we recommend is that you write it last. Make sure it includes everything in your grant. A statement of the problem is going to be kind of why your research study needs to be conducted, what your goals are to achieve, what's your kind of vision at the end of the research. And the thing to remember here is to really make sure that those goals are measurable, something you can assess. You want to include your hypotheses, which is of course the expected results, and you want to use kind of theoretical literature and empirical literature to frame your ideas. So that theory and literature review, you want to talk about what we know about your topic and your research question. This will be much shorter than like an introduction to a research article, where you really want to focus on what's relevant to your project and how your project adds to the story. You'll need to have those details about your method and design, how you'll test your research question, how you'll access participants, what methods you'll use, why. Sometimes you need a timeline of the project to really show that you can do it in the time frame of the grant. The data analysis plan is to show that you know how you will analyze your results and you will get the data that you need to run these analyses. And then finally, the significance is basically your contribution to the field. Is it a theoretical contribution, a methodological contribution, applied, etc.? So a couple things to think about as you're writing your grant proposal. You want to make sure that you know your audience. Different agencies and programs have different procedures and requirements and missions, so you want to make sure you know the priorities of the agency you're applying to. It takes time, so hopefully by now you know that writing can be a process, and you want to have an excellent application before you submit. You know, the acceptance rates are very low, and so you want to put a stellar effort in, or you may lose your chance. You also want to pay attention to detail, grammar, spelling, all the things we've been talking about this semester, following those submission instructions exactly. Reviewers are deciding that if you're a good investment, and a sloppy proposal doesn't say very good things about you. You want to be clear and concise. So you want to kind of have a clear theory and literature review. You want to make sure that your experiments directly test the hypotheses you're listing. Everything needs to be explicitly spelled out so the reviewer can see the connections. You also, though, want to make sure your proposal is thorough and reasonable. So you can explain every single step. So if you're going to use some kind of very detailed procedure, you need to explain how you'll get trained on that. But it also needs to be reasonable kind of in the grant's time frame. If you're proposing doing a longitudinal study in 6 months, well, that probably won't make sense, and they will identify that. You want to show your enthusiasm, so you also want to communicate your passion for the project. You need to get feedback. Again, hopefully by now you've seen that feedback is an important part of the writing process. So having a mentor or a colleague read and offer critiques is really important. And not getting discouraged. So rejection is part of the process, even for experienced researchers. So if you get rejected for one grant, take the feedback and make it better and try somewhere else. So especially for those like big grants, like the National Science Foundation grants, acceptance rates are like 20 to 25%. So it really is a process of trying multiple times. A couple of other things to think about as you're writing. You want to be able to address both experts and non-experts. So generally, these proposals will be reviewed by other researchers, but they may need to justify why your study is the best with other people in the field, and you need to convince people outside of your field of the importance. You need to emphasize actions and major steps. So again, this is really making clear exactly what you'll do, that you understand all of those steps and that your project is feasible. And then diagrams and visuals are something that sometimes people don't think about when they think about grants, but these are a really great way to kind of get around the word limit and illustrate really complex ideas. So these can be a powerful way to share your message. Finally, these are a few resources for searching for grants and finding grants that may be related to psychology, and I have posted links on Canvas.